Well, we're joined now reviewing that and how it may otherwise impact on Nigeria. Mr. Shina Fagbenro-Byron joins us now. He's a development expert. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, first and foremost, let me get your reaction about that election, because so many people have reacted differently. What did you think?
Yes, well, like everybody else, surprise. You know, one doesn't live in the U.S., but one has traveled there quite a number of times. And we followed the elections, we followed the polls. And unfortunately, the polls were put to shame, as it were. So it was a shock not only to most people outside the U.S., you know, but a shock to a number of Americans too, as a matter of fact, particularly the major cities, you know. So it was a shock.
You know, but I mean, when you say the polls surprised a lot of people, I know that development persons such as yourself, you work, you plan with statistics and polls. What does this then mean for polls for you going forward?
Well, it means that polls still need, you know, a bit of work to be done. I mean, if you notice the elections, Hillary won the majority of votes. But the Electoral College, which was a methodology or a system that was set aside, is put in place by the U.S. Constitution to ensure that minorities are taken care of, that the elections actually penetrate. You know, Obama won, and he won that by a pretty wide margin. Now, basically, a lot of polls have better coverage in urban areas. You know, there's a difficulty for pollsters to thoroughly reflect what happens in the rural areas, apart from the fact that there's usually limited capacity in terms of how do you penetrate rural areas. Now, for some reason, that didn't happen very well. And as most of the polls had predicted, that Hillary would have gotten up to 268 Electoral College votes. Well, as we all know now, she didn't get up to 230. And, of course, Trump had sort of alluded to the fact that there were several hidden people who would... I mean, it's a question of also voter turnout and participation.
In the elections or in the polls?
Well, if they were hidden before the elections, obviously they must have been invisible to the polls.
Because there's a theory that says that, well, it could also be that those who were administered with the questionnaire could have just either held back information or simply just said,
I don't think so. Before you go into polls, you have a methodology, you have a template, you have forms and things that you fill in, you have channels of feedback that you normally rely on. So probably the channels of feedback were not comprehensive enough, or they didn't change as the dynamics of the nation changed. A lot of things have happened in the US over the past 12 years in terms of new people coming in, immigration, people's sensitivities changing, a lot of people who've left the major cities. For example, when there was quite a bit of high prices in property in the U.S., a lot of people moved from the cities, moved into the rural areas. So if you use the same template for polling, right, you know, 10 to even 4 years ago, you probably wouldn't meet some of the new exigencies, you know, of what the population thinks and what they say. So I think there's been a lot of changes that the polls have not been able to adjust themselves to. So.
Okay, Mark.
Well, definitely, we're definitely looking at lessons. I mean, we usually do not use polling in Nigeria, but do you think that is something that we should adopt? Would it help at all? I mean, because as you rightly said, there was a difference. The difference we saw was in what President-elect Trump got in the Electoral College, and you know what the candidate Secretary Clinton got for the popular vote. For some people, they say that they're not too far apart, in the sense that when you look at the swing states that eventually gave the president-elect his vote, it was just you're looking at very tiny margins, and those states were already predicted to be swing anyway.
Yes, but you see, the weight of votes you get from any of the swing states, also determines how much electoral votes you get. I mean, Trump got over 280 electoral votes, and that when you need to cross over at 270, I mean, over 280, 283 becomes significant, particularly when your opponent didn't get off to 250. So while the popular votes, right, might have given Hillary in terms of volumes, but in terms of penetration, in terms of coverage of actually who controls the states, then Trump had it. But we need to really put this in context and learn certain things. Why were we surprised? I think it's a question of rural population versus urban population. The urban population is usually louder. The rural population is less loud. You also have the issue of how did the coalition of minorities that Obama depended on, how that did not come to play. The coalition of minorities was built by Obama, he himself being a minority. It held fast both in 2012, I think, and 2008. Yeah. That coalition did not gain that kind of resonance, probably because the principal who was supposed to lead that effort did not have the kind of appeal, that Obama had. I mean, Hillary this time around. I would like to refer us to the elections in Ekiti State of Governor Fayose. It was that kind of a surprise. Many people who were not in Ekiti, or who are not from Ekiti, who are not familiar with the politics of Ekiti at first hand, were surprised as well. But I had the good fortune of being an elections observer in Ekiti State, and I was there. And by the time we hit the ground there, we knew that the perception that we had outside of Ekiti was slightly different to what was going on inside. And it was the same dynamics. This particular election was what I call a rebellion against the elite. It was a question of the elite who are, in the cities. You could see from the posters, the demographics, that a lot of reliance by the Democratic Party was on the educated, was on city dwellers, were on, college-educated people, city dwellers, everyone that ordinarily would be in the urban areas. And that's precisely almost the same thing that happened in Ekiti State. So the kind of surprise that that election gave us really signaled the fact that at times elites should pay a bit more attention to detail. I mean, what pinches the rural people, what pinches those who we consider to be non-elite, is totally different, or it's somewhat different in several circumstances from what pinches the shoes of the so-called non-elite. So I gather in this particular case, and it's a habit of plenty of elite. I mean, we tend to build an echo chamber around ourselves.
You think this would be a wake-up call for them?
It has to be a wake-up call for them. It has to be a wake-up call for them. You see, the Mid-Belt in the U.S. is filled with a lot of people who are Americans, who know very little about the rest of the world, who are very insular in terms of, America is quite the whole world to them. Most of them are not as liberal. They don't, that's where you have the height of patriotism in the U.S., the height of nationalism, majority of whites, Caucasians, and that could be a significant indicator. And mark you, 8 years of Obama, a black man in the White House, was a significant wake-up call to galvanize those who really felt that, you know, for the life of me, I mean, America is supposed to be a Caucasian, you know, it's well, fundamentally, you know, and so I think that probably helped or Trump quite a bit, you know.